For weeks, my friend Ever has been living under siege. He's not a soldier, a diplomat, a protester, or a revolutionary. He's just a regular citizen of Venezuela. For those who don't know, Venezuela is in the middle of an uprising. The reasons, of course, are complicated, myriad, and go back at least 2 decades. But since the death of President Hugo Chavez 1 year ago, the economic situation has become increasingly dire, and major nationwide protests began on February 12, 2014. This news has largely been overshadowed by recent, arguably more serious events in Ukraine. But just because Venezuela is not a conduit for petroleum products between Russia and Western Europe, nor a proxy for the conflict between the two, and just because the death toll during protests in Venezuela hasn't yet reached the hundreds, doesn't mean that life is good for its citizens. Take case in point, Ever. He lives in Ciudad Guayana, a city of 1 million along the Orinoco River in eastern Venezuela. It is Venezuela's 6th largest city, with a dozen universities, including the one where Ever teaches, a major industrial center for iron and aluminum, many beautiful parks, and so on. But none of that matters at the moment, because on an average day in Ever's neighborhood, there are cars burning on the streets, tear gas wafting through his windows, and protesters barricading the main roads with trash, tires, and tree limbs, so the Guardia Nacional and everyone else can't get to where they're going. Even before the protests started, Ever and I had a little joke going about the dysfunctional nature of life in so-called socialist Venezuela. Whenever the internet or power in Ciudad Guayana would go down, or Ever had to wait 3 hours in line to buy rice, all regular occurrences, he would describe the situation with the hashtag third world problems. It was funny because it was ironic. That's no longer the case. Now, Ever and his family and neighbors and countrymen have spent 2 months in a state of uncertainty. They still have third world problems on their hands, but the problems have grown much bigger than waiting in lines, even while those problems continue to persist. And then, this week, something else caught my attention. Ever started describing the situation in his neighborhood as quiet, or fine, during lulls in clashes between protesters and the Guardia Nacional. Things, at least from my vantage point 3,000 miles to the north, clearly weren't fine. They were just slightly less bad. I sent Ever the following email. Ever, I'm getting a little worried that your standards for quiet have become skewed. Yesterday you said it was quiet and several vehicles were lit on fire on your street. Today it was quiet and a National Guard man was hit by a bomb. I'm saying this partly in jest, but also to remind you what peaceful life is really like, so you don't become complacent and start accepting even a little insanity as being okay. Henry. Here is his beautiful response.
You're right, Henry. I forgot to give you context for the video. He was hit by a firework, one of those that sounds very loud. They call it Matasuegra, Tumbarrancho, Bin Laden, etc. That guard was the captain that was leading. He got a very bad looking injury in the upper left leg. Fortunately, he is alive. And despite the fact that quiet was referring to what happened after those events, you are right in that I may be complacent and accepting a fair amount of insanity as being okay. And that made me think about my personality. I mean, I know that it shouldn't be happening and that is not okay. But the fact is that I live in an insane dysfunctional country where basic products such as milk, coffee, flour, and toilet paper are scarce to the point that people make insane long lines and even end up fighting and looting to get those goods. I live in a country with an insane dysfunctional economy where there is nothing cheaper than gasoline, where people have gotten rich making money by trafficking it and other subsidized goods, where the police and National Guards cannot control the rampant crime that took the life of more than 24,000 during 2013 only, where impunity is the law, where prisoners control the jails and live with a comfort that honest working people outside cannot have, where at least half the population ratifies the disaster by voting in favor of the 15-year-long revolution, where you have to drive like a drunk because of the craters in the roads, where law does not apply to people who can afford to pay off judges, where all TV stations won't report to avoid conflicts with the government, where government blames the empire, the CIA, the opposition, and nearly every imaginable thing, even iguanas, for the problems in the country, where you cannot save in local currency due to the 50% inflation rate. And I could go on and on. And on top of that, we have had about a month with many streets blocked, with National Guards using tear gas every day to dissolve peaceful protests, with some protesters setting fire on cars, buses, taking down traffic lights, trees, and even building concrete walls on the street. I have no control over any of these things. I can only talk, debate, and try to make people I know think carefully about what they do and support. And being complacent and accepting all this insanity may be a defense mechanism. If I don't do it, then I will live angry and embittered as many people I know do. I don't know if this is a good way to deal with frustration, but that's me, I think.
As a follow-up, I want to acknowledge that Ever works with me as the illustrator for the Minute Earth channel on YouTube, and the situation in Venezuela is part of the reason the video output from Minute Earth has suffered over the last month. As we've been working on this video, Ever's neighborhood continues to be the scene of clashes between protesters and the Guardia Nacional, often going long into the night. I guess I just want to make clear that the scenarios we illustrated aren't isolated events, and they're not over. They are literally the daily, insane reality. I'm thankful that I don't have to deal with tear gas coming into my apartment at 2 a.m. And I hope the situation in Venezuela will improve for all of its citizens.